Melissa stepped confidently out of the limousine, a coffee cup in hand. To her, the guard was nothing more than a backdrop for her amusement. But one reckless act turned into a nightmare she would never forget. London was cold and damp. Low-hanging clouds weighed down on the city, making it feel as if the sky had sunk too close. Fog rolled over the cobblestone streets, seeping into every crevice, blending with the moisture in the air and the lingering scent of coffee from the hands of tourists marveling at the grand magnificence of Buckingham Palace. Everything here breathed tradition, stillness, and an unshakable sense of order. The royal guards stood motionless, as if carved from stone. Their impeccably pressed red tunics, massive bearskin hats concealing their stern faces, and polished black boots planted firmly on the damp pavement, as if they themselves were the very foundation of the British monarchy. Their unmoving presence was hypnotic. Tourists whispered, pointing at them cautiously. Some snapped photos, some simply watched in awe. Then suddenly, the silence was shattered. The roar of an engine, a burst of high-pitched laughter, and the shrill squeals of girls cut through the air. A white limousine emerged from around the corner like a luxury yacht drifting through gray waters, its polished exterior reflecting the glow of streetlights and the flashing cameras of stunned tourists. Heads turned. Some raised their phones, others instinctively stepped aside. This wasn't something you saw in front of Buckingham Palace every day. The car door smoothly swung open, and stepping out onto the square was her, Melissa Carter. She didn't need to say a word. Her stance, her posture, her very aura screamed one thing. I am the most important person here. Melissa Carter, heiress to a multi-million-dollar fortune, a spoiled brat who always got what she wanted with the snap of her fingers. Her outfit was as ridiculous as her attitude. Not chic, just absurd. A massive puffy ski jacket, as if she'd just escaped a ski resort. A tiny crop top, completely inappropriate for the chilly weather. Baggy, oversized pants, clashing with thin, patent leather stilettos, absolutely useless on the slick pavement. In her manicured fingers, she clutched a ridiculous glittery mini handbag, something that looked more like a Barbie accessory than a practical purse. Behind her, her entourage tumbled out of the car, carbon copies of privilege, the daughters of equally self-absorbed millionaires. Dressed in expensive brands, but with outfits so mismatched, they looked thrown together at random. They laughed obnoxiously, soaking in the attention now fixated on them. Ugh, this place is so dull, one girl whined, curling her lips in disgust. Seriously, there's not even a good place to take a selfie. This is so boring. I expected something glamorous, but all I see are tourists. Melissa scanned the square, her face twisting with theatrical boredom. With a dramatic eye roll, she whipped out her phone, flipping the camera toward herself, angling it to capture the palace in the background. Hey guys, so I'm in, London or whatever, and honestly, there's literally nothing to do here. Haha, don't bother coming. She cackled, her entourage shrieking in agreement, their voices shrill and grating. But then, she saw something. A figure, tall, unmoving, like a statue. A royal guard. He stood there, ignoring them completely. Proud, unshaken, disciplined, and that was what got under her skin. Melissa narrowed her eyes. Perfect. A flawless target. Oh, girls, I think I just found the perfect way to save this boring day. Her lips curled into a wicked smirk. She already knew what she was going to do, but neither she nor her friends nor the crowd of tourists had any idea what was about to happen next. The square in front of Buckingham Palace was alive with its usual energy. Tourists filming videos, snapping photos, admiring the grandeur of the palace walls. And, of course, many stopped to observe the royal guards, captivated by their unwavering discipline. The crowd kept a respectful distance, well aware of the unspoken rules that should never be broken. But Melissa Carter never lived by rules. She stepped forward lazily, tossing her tiny designer purse over her shoulder, the sharp click of her expensive heels echoing across the stone pavement. Her friends trailed behind, whispering to each other but keeping their eyes locked on her. They knew exactly what was about to happen. Melissa was about to put on a show. She stopped right in front of the guard. She was so close that she could see every crisp fold in his uniform, every perfectly polished button. But one thing irritated her the most. He wasn't even looking at her. "Hey, are you even human?" She scoffed loudly, narrowing her eyes. "Or just an overpriced decoration?" She took another step forward, so close now that only a few inches separated them. The crowd murmured uneasily. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something ridiculous was about to happen. But Melissa didn't notice any of it. She was convinced that the universe revolved around her today. "All right, let's test it," she grinned, snapping her fingers right in front of the guard's face. No reaction. Her lips curled in annoyance. "Ugh, this is so boring. He won't even blink." Her friends giggled behind her. People in the crowd started watching with disapproval, but no one stepped in. No one wanted to start trouble with rich tourists. Melissa, unimpressed with the spectacle so far, decided to raise the stakes. She pulled out her phone and started live streaming. "Yo guys, I'm in London, and check this out. I found a human mannequin." She circled the guard, filming him from different angles, mocking his stillness. Her friends shrieked with laughter. The crowd watched with tense silence, but to Melissa, it still wasn't enough. "Ugh, I'm bored," she whined dramatically, flashing a wide grin at her camera. "Let's see what happens if I freshen him up a little." With a careless smirk, she unzipped her mini handbag and pulled out a paper coffee cup. Freshly brewed, scalding hot, a rich caramel vanilla aroma still rising from the lid. Her friends shrieked, someone in the crowd gasped, but no one moved. Melissa stepped forward, and without a moment of hesitation, she flung the coffee right onto the guard's pristine red tunic. The dark brown liquid splattered across the fabric, leaving behind ugly, spreading stains. The crowd froze. For a few long, suffocating seconds, the square fell so silent you could hear the wind rustling through the air. Behind her, her friends clamped their hands over their mouths, but their shoulders trembled with suppressed laughter. "Melissa?" She simply flicked her hair back, pulled out her phone, and snapped a selfie, grinning smugly. To her, this was nothing more than a funny little moment. But what she didn't know was that she had just signed her own sentence. The crowd held its breath. A light breeze swept across the square, making the coffee stain on the guard's tunic stand out even more against the crimson fabric. It looked almost symbolic, a filthy stain on a flawless uniform, an insult to tradition, a challenge to a century-old history. But none of that was the most important thing. The most important thing was that the guard moved. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. People standing closest to the scene instinctively stepped back. Some rushed to record the moment on their phones, but most simply stared, their mouths slightly open in shock. The royal guard stepped forward, slow, controlled. His polished boots struck the pavement with a weight that felt like the entire city pressing down. And then, thud! The butt of his rifle slammed into the stone pavement, producing a thunderous impact. Melissa jerked backward as if electrocuted, like she had just come face to face with a bottomless abyss. "Step back! Now!" His voice was deep, calm, unwavering. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a threat. But it carried a gravity so intense, it sent chills down the spine. Melissa swallowed hard. Her friends, who had been shrieking with laughter just moments ago, now looked as if they had seen a ghost. One of them clutched another's shoulder, while the third, with trembling hands, tried to hide behind the others. What? He's not supposed to move," one of them stammered, staring at the guard as if he were some mythical figure suddenly brought to life. But he did move, and now he towered over Melissa. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. You can't tell me what to do. You're just... She couldn't finish the sentence, because the guard didn't move. He didn't blink. His breathing remained steady, but his silence was louder than any words. He stared directly at her, and in his gaze there was nothing. No anger, no aggression, just an unshakable, icy stillness. It felt as if all of London itself was looking right at her. And in that moment, Melissa realized her mistake. She felt it in every inch of her body. This wasn't an attraction. This wasn't a game. This wasn't some lifeless mannequin for her amusement. He was a royal guard. And now, she understood that she had crossed a line that should never be crossed. A cold sweat coated her skin. Her hands shook. She took a step back, then another. "Mel, maybe we should go?" one of her friends whispered, still unable to process what was happening. But it was too late. The crowd stood in complete silence. The guard remained motionless. And Melissa, she suddenly felt her entire world crumbling around her. But there was no way to undo what had just been done. Melissa took a step back, then another. But the world around her seemed to shrink. The space felt tight, suffocating, and every movement seemed to happen in slow motion. The crowd stood frozen in tense anticipation. Her friends exchanged nervous glances, some already starting to look away. It felt like even the air had thickened, forming a heavy lump in Melissa's throat. And then, from behind the palace gates, 2 more guards stepped forward. Their steps were sharp, precise, perfectly synchronized. Their movements exuded a cold confidence that would send shivers down the spine of any normal person. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind them, the police appeared. Melissa felt her heart tighten in her chest, but she tried to keep her composure. She still believed this was all some kind of ridiculous misunderstanding. "What? Are you joking?" Her voice was shrill, shaky, and even she could hear it. But no one was joking. A tall officer with an unreadable expression stepped forward. "You are under arrest for assaulting a member of the Royal Guard." Melissa blinked. "What? For what?" Now there was real hysteria in her voice. The officer didn't flinch. "For attacking a state symbol of Britain." The crowd erupted into murmurs again. Cameras continued capturing every second of the unfolding scene. Melissa staggered back. "You have no right. I won't forgive you for this." Her voice cracked, but no one cared. The officers weren't in a rush, but their movement was steady and determined. They approached her the way hunters close in on prey that has backed itself into a corner. And in that moment, Melissa broke. She turned and bolted. But she didn't get far. A swift yank, her wrist was seized. "Don't touch me!" she shrieked, thrashing with all her strength. "My parents will destroy you!" But the officers remained unfazed. They had dealt with people like her before. As she struggled harder, one of them moved with trained efficiency. A quick twist, her arm was locked. A sharp turn, and suddenly Melissa was airborne. A dull thud, and she hit the cold stone pavement face first. The crowd erupted. "Oh my God! Wow! Justice!" Melissa felt dirt sticking to her cheek, her knees and elbows scraping against the rough stones. "Get me up immediately! Do you know who I am?" She screeched, flailing like a fish out of water. But no one was listening. Her arms were yanked behind her back, and with a loud click, handcuffs snapped around her wrists. She tried to struggle again, but one of the officers pressed a knee into her back, pinning her to the ground. "No!" You can't! You can't! She shrieked desperately, but her screams were swallowed by the noise of the crowd. Silently, the officers hauled her up and began leading her toward the police car. Her friends said nothing. One covered her mouth in shock, unable to believe what she was seeing. Another frantically filmed the entire event, already imagining how many views the video would get. The crowd buzzed with murmurs. Now I understand why the Royal Guard doesn't tolerate this kind of behavior, someone whispered. Melissa frantically looked around one last time. She needed a lifeline. But there was none. And just a few feet away from all the chaos stood the guardsman, unmoving, fearless, unshaken, as if nothing had happened, like a symbol that could never be broken. Cold floor, dirty walls, the stale, nauseating stench of sweat, alcohol, and unwashed clothes. Melissa was thrown into the holding cell, and for a moment, she couldn't process where she was. Her heart was pounding, as if trying to break free from her chest. Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. She pushed herself up on her elbows, looked around, and everything inside her turned cold. Homeless people, drunks, shady-looking figures eyeing her with murky, unreadable gazes. A massive man with yellowed, crooked teeth smirked at her lazily. "Well, well, princess, looks like you messed up too, huh?" he rasped, his grin making her shudder. "Stay away from me!" she shrieked, scrambling backward. But there was nowhere to run. The cell was small, and no matter where she looked, someone was looking right back at her. A woman with a swollen face cackled hoarsely and scratched at her greasy hair. Against the wall, a scrawny man picked at his fingernails absent-mindedly. Someone else muttered unintelligible words under their breath. But worst of all was the feeling of filth. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, stale smoke, and old sweat, permeating every breath she took. Her perfect life was over. Screams for help. Melissa rushed to the bars and grabbed hold of them. "Hey! You can't do this to me!" Her voice echoed down the hallway, but no one responded. She rattled the bars. "My parents will fire all of you! You'll regret locking me up with these—" But the police were unmoved. A passing officer didn't even glance at her. "Get used to it, princess. Everyone's the same in here." Prison hours. Minutes stretched into eternity. Melissa paced back and forth, avoiding touching the walls, refusing to sit on the grimy bench, holding her breath so she wouldn't inhale the putrid air. She could feel her expensive clothes absorbing the filth, her hair reeking of smoke and sweat. She tried to ignore the people around her, but they were there. The skinny man across from her just stared, unblinking. The reeking hobo muttered under his breath, licking his cracked lips now and then. She didn't belong here, but she had to wait. And then they arrived. A hope that died. Her parents entered the police station. Melissa gasped and lunged toward the bars. "Finally! Get me out of here!" But something was off. They weren't rushing to save her. Her father stood with arms crossed, his face like stone. Her mother didn't even look at her. Melissa reached through the bars. "Take me home! This is ridiculous! They locked me up with bums!" Her father exhaled heavily, rubbing his face, shaking his head. "You got yourself into this. Get yourself out." Betrayal. Melissa froze. "What?" She stared at them in disbelief. "You think we're going to clean up this disgrace?" Her mother finally lifted her gaze, looking at her not like a daughter, but like garbage. "You threw coffee at the Royal Guard in front of the entire world. It's in the news. You've disgraced our family." But do you have any idea what you've done?" It's not my fault. They humiliated me." Her father grimaced. "Really?" "Yes, they provoked me." You dumped coffee on a guard in front of 100 cameras. Her mother exhaled sharply, irritated. How exactly do you explain that? It was for a video. For a video? Her father arched a brow mockingly. Well, congratulations. You're an internet meme now. You're a disgrace. People despise you. Everyone is talking about you. So yes. Her mother lifted her chin. You got yourself into this mess. And they turned away. They turned away. They walked away. Melissa screamed. No, you can't leave me here. Come back. We're family. But the door shut. They didn't look back. She was alone. The final nail in the coffin. A few hours later, the official statement from her parents played on TV. We will not assist our daughter in dealing with the consequences of her actions. She is an adult and must take responsibility for her behavior. At that moment, her life was truly over. London moved on. People rushed about their business. Traffic jams filled the streets with their usual noise, and tourist buses crawled lazily through the roads. Life carried on as if nothing had happened. The square in front of Buckingham Palace was once again bustling with people. Tourists snapped selfies. Some admired the towering golden gates. Others browsed souvenir stands. Camera shutters clicked non-stop, capturing the moment. But on this day, their eyes kept returning to one person. The guard. He stood, just as still, just as fearless, just as imposing. His red uniform was clean and immaculate. His towering bearskin hat loomed over the crowd, and his polished boots shone as if untouched by dirt. And if someone unaware of recent events looked at him now, they would think that nothing had happened. But it had. The fall of a rich princess. Melissa Carter had spent the entire night in a filthy cell on a narrow bench, surrounded by drunks and vagrants. Her world, her gleaming limousine, designer clothes, extravagant parties, had all collapsed in an instant. She had screamed, demanded her parents, insisted on a lawyer, but no one treated her like a princess. She was just another arrested troublemaker who had desecrated a symbol of Britain. When her parents finally arrived, she was certain they would take her home. She had leapt to her feet, rushed to them, convinced they would protect her like they always did. But all she saw in their eyes was cold emptiness. You got yourself into this. Get yourself out. Those words struck like a bolt of lightning, shattering her confidence into dust. Her parents turned and walked away. She had tried to scream, but her voice broke. They abandoned her. Later, as journalists swarmed their home with questions, her parents issued an official statement. We will not help our daughter out of this situation. She must face the consequences of her actions. That was the end. She lost everything. Disgrace for life. By the time she was released, the world already knew her name and mocked it. News headlines were everywhere. Millionaire's daughter humiliates herself in front of all of Britain. The moment she realized no one would save her. Once wealthy and influential, now a nobody. Online, millions laughed at her. The video of her arrest went viral. Memes flooded the internet by the hour. People watched, over and over again, the footage of her being slammed into the pavement, handcuffed, dragged to the police car, and they kept commenting, "Wow, this is so satisfying to watch. The royal guard is unbreakable. The day a spoiled rich girl learned money doesn't buy everything." Melissa stared at the screen of her phone, struggling to breathe. Once, every post she made was flooded with likes and compliments. Now, there were only insults and ridicule. The guard who could not be broken. And the guard? He stood, just as still, just as fearless, just as imposing. He had been there when she was arrested. He had been there when she screamed that she would be saved. He had been there when the entire world realized the Royal Guard does not tolerate disrespect. He did not care about her tears. He did not care how much money she had. He stood his post because the Royal Guard does not change. But she had changed. The final outcome. She had arrived confident, arrogant, believing she was untouchable. She left humiliated, broken, abandoned, even by her own parents. Her name no longer held power. It only carried shame. And the guard? He kept standing, like a symbol that could never be broken. But she was.